Judges chapter number 10, but the part of the chapter that I want to focus on is it's just on verse number 2 where the Bible reads, "A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left." And the title of the sermon tonight is, "Hold your heart with your right hand." Hold your heart with your right hand. Well, if you were here like over a year and a half ago, I preached a sermon titled the same, "Hold Your Heart with Your Right Hand." But at that sermon, I think I focused on being as a leader. So why you have to hold your your heart with your right hand as a leader. But this time, we'll be focusing on in the perspective of a servant. Okay. So that's where my sermon will be focusing on. So this sermon is like a second half of my sermon which I made a year and a half ago. So it's like over a year and a half years old. And I was last Sunday, right? Because Brother Stuckey preached about the importance of not following your heart with regards to making decisions, something like that, because the heart is deceitful. Seems like it's tied with that sermon, so I don't have to develop most of the points here tonight. It's because of the fact it's fresh from your mind. But my sermon would lean toward as a servant. So we'd focus as a servant why we have to not obey our heart as a servant. And since that sermon is it's been a while since I delivered that sermon, let me refresh what's the importance of holding your heart with your right hand. Well, the Bible is written in a general way. For example, the Bible says the sons of God, referring to those saved individuals. But that's not limited only to men, right? It's just called sons of God is because of the fact that it's general. So the Bible in Ecclesiastes chapter number 10, verse number 2 is specifying in a general way. The general way is most of us actually is right-handed. So let me ask a question. Who in this room is left-handed? So we only have one, right? So all of us is basically right-handed. So the Bible basically made this explanation using the right-handed man's perspective. So what does it mean with your right hand? Well, if you're right-handed, your stronger hand would be your right hand, right? And if you're left-handed, then your stronger hand would be your left hand. That's it. So I don't say that if you're left-handed, you're not holding your heart with your right hand. Actually, the alternate title for this sermon is "Hold Your Heart with the Right Hand." Means the right hand, not the physical right hand, but it's the right hand which can hold your heart. So that's the concept of this sermon. And also I mentioned in that sermon concepts regarding mentions to the left-handed. So you don't have to turn there, but the Bible actually mentions specific people or group of people who were left-handed. For example, in Judges chapter number 3, verse number 15. This is pertaining to Ehud. He is left-handed. He's a man of Benjamite, left-handed. Also, in Judges chapter number 20, verse number 16, this is talking to the Ephraimites. The Bible mentions that there were 700 chosen men left-handed. Okay, so the Bible tells in a specific situation, but the Bible mentions that they're left-handed because there's a necessity for the Bible to say so. For example, they said, for the children of Benjamin, because of the fact that he's explaining after that everyone could sling stones at an hair breadth and not miss. So he's making mention of the left-handed because of the fact that left-handed slingers are too accurate when they sling stones. Imagine that it's like a hair breadth. So it's like a hair breadth of allowance there when they shoot at their target. So turn, if you would, to Jeremiah chapter number 17. Okay. This chapter and verse number 9 is almost familiar to all of us. As you're turning in, let me read to you Jeremiah chapter 17, verse number 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So the heart is deceitful. That's why we have to hold it with our firmest hand or our strongest hand. Because if you don't hold it, for example, if you're right-handed and you hold it with your left hand, then there's a possibility that you would drop it. Or there's a possibility that it would overcome you. So you don't have to turn your, but in Matthew chapter number 12, verse number 34, the Bible reads, O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak of good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. So, this is one good indicator. For example, if you're talking to somebody, it's like for example, covetous persons, right? When you're talking to a covetous person, then most of the time he would speak about money, right? He would speak about his riches, or how many houses did he have, or cars that he have, property, something like that, and the trends in the stock market, something. So that's how you know that this person is about money, right? Because he thought that in his heart, and sometimes subconsciously, is we utter it with our mouth. That's why when you talk to people, always talking about his or her experience in soul winning, you know that same person is going out soul winning, because he has these stories about soul winning. Because we don't like recycle stories in soul winning, because we go out soul winning almost every week. So we have a lot of stories to tell about soul winning, right? You only recycle stories in soul winning when you're backslidden, because you don't have any stories to tell anymore. Then you recycle those stories. But if you're going out every week, then basically is we know that you're soul winning, and that's the stories that you say. What we'll be doing this evening is like I'm gonna give you 4 examples of those servants who. 2 of them were positive examples, and another 2 of them are the negative examples. So let's move on with the example. Example number 1 is David. So turn, if you would, in 1 Samuel chapter number 18. 1 Samuel chapter number 18. So one of our best examples in this sermon is King David. So he is behaving himself wisely, serving Saul. So you say that David is a king, so why would he fall into the category of a servant? Well, David, if you have read his story in the history in the Old Testament, David was once a servant to Saul before he was king, right? So you're there in 1 Samuel chapter number 18, the Bible reads, And it came to pass as they came when David was, starting in verse number 6, 1 Samuel chapter number 18, verse number 6. And it came to pass as they came when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the woman came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets with joy and with instruments of music. And the woman answered one another as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000. So this story is about after the battle against the Philistines, right? So David was once a servant of Saul. Okay? So one of the examples that we have here tonight is King David. So what's in King David that he held his heart with his right hand? Well, in this story is, if we would focus on this, the latter part of the story, starting verse number 7, it says that Saul has slain his 1,000 and David his 10,000. So basically, the ladies were singing, and they were singing this song that Saul had 1,000 and David had 10,000 slain by slain Philistines by number. But it seems like just a song. It's not that accurate, I think. So they said that David had 10,000 and Saul had 1,000. So meaning that they're exalting David more than highly of Saul. So he has a lot of Philistines that he killed supposedly. So this is what the women are singing when they welcome David and Saul. So at this point, David is exalted. But if we would go in 1 Samuel chapter number 18, verse before verse number 6 and verse number 5, It says that David went out whithersoever Saul sent him and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servant. So he humbled himself. He behaved himself wisely. So if you say that the people are exalting him, but he behaved himself wisely. He didn't react like, when you're popular or something like that. And let's, if we read the Bible chronologically, before this is where David slew Goliath before this, right? So he's kind of popular. So he's the all-star, the MVP at that time. So people really knew him. But he, in chapter after that, he said he behaved himself wisely. So he didn't just like rode the fame or the popularity thing. That's the trend that he has at the moment. The Bible says that he behaved himself wisely. And also, if we would notice, especially in chapter 18 alone, the Bible mentions 3 times that David behaved himself wisely. So if you would go to verse number 14 and verse number 30. So in 1 Samuel chapter number 18, verse number 14, and David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And in verse number 30, then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass, after they went forth, that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. And also, in this point, in verse number 14, this is where Saul was already jealous of David. So he already marked him after that day. So even though David has this fear of Saul at that point, yet he still behaved himself wisely. So it came to the fact I already killed Goliath, the giant. So who can stop me? Or who else can match my strength or something like that, or power? He has the very right act, or he has the very opportunity to kill Saul. One of the reasons is because of the fact that before that, he was already anointed by God to be the king, right? He has already been appointed by Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter number 16. So he has verse number 5, it's 1 Samuel chapter number 16, right? So, and also the people was with David. If you would turn to 2 Samuel chapter number 5, the people would also affirm that they support David. For example, in 2 Samuel chapter number 5, verse number 1, starting in verse number 1, then came all the tribes of Israel to David and to Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also in time past, this was referring when he was a servant to Saul, when Saul was king over us. Thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel, and the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So David is already leading the charge. Maybe that's one of the reasons why the ladies were tagging, they're singing that he has 10,000 more than Saul, which had only 1,000, right? So the people is already with David at that time, because they knew David is leading the charge, especially in the war against the Philistines. But David still humbled himself, okay? And even Saul was pursuing after him. For example, when you remember that when they were hid in the cave and Saul is going to cover his feet, the Bible says, which is a euphemism, and then they have a chance to kill Saul, but David just cut the skirt, right? And also when Saul was asleep, when God caused a deep sleep to him and his guard Abner, David has also the opportunity to kill him. But still, he didn't follow the urges of his companions, like one of the sons of Zeruiah, Asahel, which David said he is not going to put forth his hand to the Lord's anointed. He just, allowed something happen to Saul, especially when he was killed by the Philistines, so that he could reign, so that he could take over the king. So what we can see from this example, number one, is like David, he didn't allow that thing. He in this example, it's not just his own heart. It is also the other influences around him that's telling him, hey, you have the opportunity to kill Saul. Why you shouldn't do it at this moment? You can take over the kingdom if you want, but he just hold his heart with his right hand so that he would allow the will of God to happen to Saul and to him to be the king in Israel. So I'm going to make a summary at the end of this sermon. Why is it important that we have to hold our heart with our right hand? But the end of this, in the end of this life of David, we knew that he himself take over the kingdom, right? So there's no reason to be in a hurry in his situation, right? So another example that we can have is Joseph. Another example. So turn, if you would, in Genesis chapter number 37. So another example in the Bible, so for me, is somebody who held his heart with his right hand is Joseph. So if we can think of characters specifically who has the very right to complain or to whine about his situation, maybe we can think about Joseph himself, because he was sold as a slave into Egypt because his brothers envied him. And his time in servitude or being a slave is has two parts in it. Number one is when he's in good times, and the other is in bad times. So the first part is in good times. You're there in Genesis chapter number 37, verse number 28. The Bible reads, "Then there passed by Midianites." This is the part of the story where his brothers sold him. "And they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt." So this is the reason why Joseph ended up in Egypt, because he was sold to the Midianites, and the Midianites were going to Egypt. Okay, so even though he was sold as a servant, Joseph himself managed to go up through the ranks. In Genesis chapter number 39, two chapters, is starting in verse number 1. I'll read to you as you're going there in Genesis chapter number 39. "And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him with the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field." So we can see in this story that even though that Joseph was sold into slavery, he has the very reason to be bitter in his life, right? He has the very reason to not complain about everything. But we can see in here that everything that he was given to him by his master Potiphar the Egyptian prospered, because the Lord was with him, and also because of the fact of his point of view in his situation. Maybe if you would say that like you end up being a sold or being a servant, well, you can say in your heart that I have no value anymore, right? All I can do is clean or something, or mop the floor, something like that, or do some menial tasks, for example. But Joseph, we can see him that he was given all what is in Potiphar's hand. So he's the manager of Potiphar's house. Imagine that. So how would you go to the rank like that in that, for example, that fast, for example, even though you're a servant, yet you were given the opportunity to rule the house of Potiphar himself, right? So if you would ask your question, this thing, do you think that Potiphar would give Joseph the position of ruling his house or his properties? if he's constantly whining, or if he's constantly pointing to the fact that he was sold by his brother, or looking his situation? Maybe not, right? You can picture out in the office. Because promotion in the office is like, there are people in the office like always complaining, for example, complaining about how bad the management or how bad they run things, something like that. And there's people like always threatening the management, like they're gonna file the resignation, something like that. But when it comes to promotion, if you're the ones who is always threatening the management or always complaining against the management, maybe you won't have the promotion. You won't be considered into promotion because of the fact that the management looks for somebody who would, be a partner who could grow the business more, for example. So we can see Joseph, he held his, ego, maybe of being sold into Egypt, yet doing his things, doing things that prosper, could prosper, right? So sometimes we can humble ourselves, but we should bear in mind that people around us are also effective with our action. Sometimes we react and something like this happen. It's because of the fact that we didn't control ourselves, right? We just let ourselves go off. But we have to think that in this situation, I think if Joseph would just complain, maybe God would not bless the house of Potiphar also, because of the fact that Joseph is always complaining. But we can see here, this is a positive example, that since Joseph is not complaining, he was doing his thing, he's doing it unto the Lord, then in turn, Potiphar was also blessed by God. So that's what we can see. It's like if we could apply it in our secular job, something like that. If you were always complaining, then the company that you're working is not being blessed by God, right? Well, it depends upon situations. Like, I don't think like each and every one of us would be working in a wicked company, because that's one of the considerations that we're considering before we apply the job. But for any ordinary company for something, right? So if we would be complaining, always complaining every time, we would allow ourselves, like our thoughts go out in our mouth, something like that, then that would affect the person around us also. And not also our secular jobs, if you would consider our families, something like that, right? So that's one of the reasons why we have to hold our heart, or the thoughts in our hearts. We not utter it or express it outside. It's because of the fact that will not only affect us, but also affect the people around us, right? So let's move on to the second. Sorry, it's not the second, but let's just continue the story in verse number 7. Let's just continue the story, right? So in his in the first part of his being a servant, in the good times, he was tempted to commit sin, right, with his master's wife. But he still managed to behave himself because he feared God. In verse number 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." Okay? But he refused and said unto his master's wife, "Behold, my master, wotted not what is with me in the house, and he had committed all that he had to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art great, because thou art his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And it came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her, or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. So this is a story where they made excuse or a reason to throw Joseph in the prison. The Potiphar's wife is that Joseph ran away in the story, right? So he ran away, he left his clothes, and they said he took an Egyptian to mock us. That's what she said. So he was accused of an attempted rape, something like that. But the true reason is like the wife is like want to commit adultery, right? So he was thrown into prison. So this starts the bad times of Joseph. Even though he's a slave or a servant, but the bad times started here because he's thrown into prison right now. So even though he's a servant unto Potiphar, but still he is free because he can go out, something like that. Because if you could remember in the Philippines, if you study the history, it's like we have these two kind of servants, right? There's two kind of alipin in the Philippines. As far as I can remember, there's aliping na mamahay and alipin sa gigilid, right? So yung aliping na mamahay is somebody who has his own house, he's free, he would just go to the house of the master, like to do things, minister, something like that. But the aliping sa gigilid is totally in servitude or in bondage. They have no freedom, right? So they're serving all of their life. So Joseph is, we can consider at the first part of his life as aliping na mamahay, right? And then the second part is during bad times. Why is it bad? It's because of the fact that he was thrown into prison, right? Because of the false accusation. We don't have to turn there for the sake of time. It's in Genesis chapter number 39, verses 7 to 20. Yet, even inside the prison, he still humbled himself. So, another part of his life that he has the very right to complain is because of the fact that he's thrown into prison right now. You know, you don't have any mistake, you don't have any fault, your brother sold you into slavery, and then you did what is right in Potiphar's house, and you were accused wrongfully, and then you're thrown into prison. So he has the really reason to complain. But in Genesis chapter number 39, verse number 20, I'll read to you. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison. So this is where he was put into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that he was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So imagine, you just got into prison, and then now you're the leader of the prison, right? You're the mayor of the prison. As far as I can remember, if we watch the televisions in 1990s, like when you go into prison, first you're the least the prison, right? Tagamasahe ng mga boss sa prisuan. Pero in Joseph's case, he was the leader in the prison. So how did that happen? You know? Do you really think that he would just instantly be trusted by the keeper of the prison to oversee the prisoners? I don't think so. Maybe if he's complaining about his situation, maybe he wasn't the one who is going to rule the prison. Because, you know, and not all people, but, you know, most of the people who are thrown into prison are these macho guys, right? He could be easily beaten up if he's like skinny. But we can see in this story, like he's the leader of the prison. The only, go back to chapter, in your 39, okay, you're in the same chapter actually. So the only thing that we could see in this story is like the situation changed from his servitude into Potiphar, now he's in prison. But he would go to verse number 3, and then you would put your hand in verse number 23. Let's notice here in verse number 3, that's the first part of his servitude. It's like it's the good times. And then starting in verse number 20, that's the bad time. If you would notice the word in verse number 3, the Lord was with him, right? And the master saw that the Lord was with him. And in verse number 23, after the semicolon, we could see that because the Lord was with him. The same situation. And also, if you would go back in verse number 3, the Lord made all that he did to prosper. And if you would go to verse number 23, after the Lord was with him and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. So same situation. That means that Joseph didn't change his view of life. He didn't complain. He didn't reacted different. He just did what he did in Potiphar's house. So he didn't complain about his situation, but he did it because the Lord was his master, right? So whatsoever situation in life, whether you're broke or whether you're in in the midst of your financial prosperity in life, you shouldn't be changing your vision and how you see things, especially when you're serving God. And also, especially when you're working, we have different skills, we have different abilities, so we work differently. But if you do work and do it for God, then God will prosper it. It doesn't matter what your situation in life is, because we can see it's the same situation in Joseph's life, but the environment is different. He's free on the other side, and the other side he's a prisoner. But the same the same result happened, the same outcome happened because of the fact that he didn't change his prospect in life. So he can complain all he wants if he just allowed his heart to do so, but he didn't do it because of the fact that he was firm to hold his heart in his right hand. And we know the end of this story, right? If we would continue to read that, in the end, Joseph was blessed and he became the second most powerful person at that time, right? He is only second to Pharaoh. So that's what happened, So that's the reason, that's one of the reasons why we have to hold our heart with our right hand. It's because of the fact that God will bless us, and we will not be we will not fall into these guys who will be looking to in this third and fourth example. So that's the positive example. That's the positive mentions or the positive examples that we can see in the Bible. So let's move on with our negative examples. Okay, so we could categorize two of them. But actually, all these examples that I took in the Bible was, since I would be speaking to the congregation tonight, is like I would say that they're saved, or the Bible doesn't explicitly say that they're saved, but I would lean toward the side of them being saved. Okay, so these are the bad examples or the negative examples of people who didn't hold their heart with their right hand. So let's go to the third example. It's like Gehazi. Okay, so Gehazi is a servant to Elisha in the Old Testament, right? So we could categorize him as one of the silent or secreted type of servant. So we will see that later. So turn, if you would, in 2 Kings chapter number 5. So why would you say that Gehazi is saved? Yeah, the Bible doesn't say explicitly that he's saved, because we have examples in the Bible also, which, for example, Judas Iscariot being saved. But the difference between Judas Iscariot and Gehazi is like the fact that Jesus had 11 other disciples to talk to, right? And also he picked Judas Iscariot for a certain reason to fulfill. But imagine you're in the Old Testament and you're Elisha and you're walking with your servant. I don't think like you're walking with somebody who is not saved, because there's only two of you, right? You're walking in this country, something like that. Obviously, I believe that he's saved. But whether he's saved or not, we can still learn from these examples that we can see in the Bible. So you're there in 2 Kings chapter number 5. So this is the story where he coveted and he didn't held his heart in his right hand, and he allowed himself to go after that treasure. So this is a story about, I'll just give you an overview about the story. This is Naaman the Syrian. So there's a guy in Syria. He is a servant of the king of Syria, and he's leprous. So they learned that there's a prophet in Samaria that could heal somebody of their sickness. So the king of Syria made a letter to the king of Israel that if you could just heal my servant Naaman, then I would give you something like this. So at first point, the king of Israel was mad about it, because he think like he's a spiritual healer or something, that he could heal Naaman. But later Elisha went and he said that he would heal him. So to make the story short, Naaman was healed of his leprosy because he went into Jordan and he dipped himself. At first, he was complaining, but later was persuaded by his servants, so he was healed of that leprosy. And then after he was healed, he was glad, and he wanted to give Elisha money because of the healing that he received. So in 2 Kings chapter number 5, starting in verse number 15, and he returned to the man of God and all his company, and came and stood before him. So this is the part that he would be giving payment to Elisha. And he said, "Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant." But he said, this is Elisha speaking, "As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take, but he refused. So Elisha refused the blessing from Naaman. So what did Gehazi did? So they went away, and then not Elisha, but Gehazi coveted into his heart. There's a lot of them, like 1,000 shekels of gold and 10 shekels of silver, and changes of garments. So maybe he said, if I could just take like 2 or 3, then that would be enough. No, maybe that won't be too bad of a sin. So he thought that in himself. Since he saw his master refuse to take the gifts, maybe he could take some of them for himself, since he's with Elisha and he's a servant of Elisha. So if you're there in 2 Kings chapter number 5, starting in verse number 20. So he ran and then went to Naaman's Haman's group, and then he said in verse number 20, "But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said before him, said, Behold, my servant had spared Naaman the Syrian, in not receiving at his hands the which he brought. But as the Lord liveth, I will run after him, and take somewhat of him." So Gehazi followed after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running after him, he lighted down from the chariot to meet him, and said, "Is all well?" Verse number 22, and he said, "All is well. My master has sent me, saying, Behold, even now there be come to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments." And Naaman said, "Be content, take 2 talents. And he urged him, and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags, with 2 changes of garments, and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they bare them before him. And when he came to the tower, he took them from their hands, and bestowed them in the house, and let the men go, and they departed." So that's what he did. I want you to focus in the part, verse number 21. Verse number 20. Okay? So this is not just, thing like he didn't thought about it. He just run away, something like that, so that he could receive some part of the gift from Naaman. But this is the thing that he already decided. He thought it in his heart. For example, we could notice there in the end of verse number 20. He said, "But as the Lord liveth, I will run after him." So when you say "as the Lord liveth," this is as where they say this in the Old Testament. There's 27 mentions of it, and it's used when you swear something or making something sure. So he didn't just slip, and he just thought about something a second ago, like, what if I would take something like this? He already purposed it. He already purposed to run after Naaman. So this is not just like a simple mistake. He already thought about it. So what's the consequence of it, right? So if we would continue reading in verse number 26, because in verse number 25, Elisha asked him. So let's continue reading. But he went in, so this is after that he is going to enter the tower, and stood before his master. And Elisha said unto him, "Whence comest thou, Gehazi?" And he said, "Thy servant went no whither." So, like when we commit sins sometimes, and when we don't admit it, sometimes we have to make another sin to cover this sin that we committed, right? At this point, he was lying. He was lying to Elisha. Let's continue reading. And he said unto him, Went not mine heart with thee when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money and to receive garments and oliveyards and vineyards and sheep and oxen and men servants and maid servants? So this is the the punishment. The leprosy therefore of Naaman shall cleave unto thee and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence a leper as white as snow. So the leprosy of Naaman went to Gehazi because of the fact that he coveted, right? So this is also one of the reasons why I think that he's saved, because he was judged by God. And this judgment is not like something like a small thing. He has to bear it forever, right? He has to be reminded of the mistake that he made. So what's the end resulting of this thing that Gehazi did? So if we would turn in 2 Kings chapter number 8, verses 4 to 5, so I'll just give you an overview. I will read to you before you were turning there. Okay. So, and the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha hath done. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king, now he had restored the dead body to life, that, behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and his is her son whom Elisha restored to life. So the end part of the story of Gehazi was like he's not a servant to Elisha now, right? Because if we could remember the story in 2 Kings chapter number 6, verse number 17, Elisha has his own new servant right now. You remember the story when they were compassed about with the Syrians? And there's a young man with Elisha, that's his new servant, and he said, Lord, open the eyes of the lad. They saw the chariots of fire and horsemen. So that's the part of it. So Elisha has now his new servant. Imagine you're Gehazi and you missed that part. You know, when I'm reading the Old Testament, that's the part of the Old Testament that I'm really imagining. You know, they were compassed by chariots of fire and horsemen. So that's the one who took Elijah, and that's what the one Elisha saw when he was taken by a whirlwind in a chariot of fire. So imagine that, you know, it's like the ones we saw in these fictional part of the movies. So imagine missing that part because of the fact that you coveted after the two pieces of silver, right? And changes of garments. That's something you won't want to exchange your whole life. And also, if he's saved, then it's a picture of, you know, saved Christian. If we would allow our heart, we wouldn't hold it with our right hand, we would stop serving God, right? Because in this part, he's not serving Elisha anymore. So he spent his time like telling stories in the king's house. So basically, you're just a former soul winning, talking about your soul winning experiences a decade ago, something like that. You don't have new stories anymore because you're not soul winning, right? So if he's serving Elisha, maybe he has new stories about the adventures of Elisha and where he went, what he witnessed this part, like he he resurrected a young boy to life, right? That's his story. That's the part that that's the only thing that he could tell, because that's the part that he lastly witnessed of the adventures of Elisha. Maybe if he had continued, then maybe he could tell about the stories of how cool it is being, you know, compassed with chariots of fire and horsemen to the king. But that's the end story of him. So if you won't hold our heart with our right hand, especially if you're saved, you won't be serving God anymore. You'll be doing the repercussions of the actions that you made. So that's why it's important. So for the sake of time, let's move on to our last example. Okay, so that one is a silent type, right? Because he's really silent about his actions. He didn't tell his master Elisha, Gehazi. So let's move on to this last example, Jonathan, which is the vocal or open type. So I told you I'm giving you examples of saved individuals in the Bible. Okay, so Jonathan, Saul's son, this is the one who is vocal, okay, or open in saying his opinions. Because, sometimes we turn, if you would, in 1 Samuel chapter number 14. Okay? For example, in church, like in leadership, sometimes we don't agree 100% what the decisions that the leadership made. All of us has our own opinions, right? We have all opinions on how we should lay out the chairs. We have opinions what's the brand of the air conditioning unit, or we have all opinions about everything, right? But not all our opinions should be voiced out, okay? Not our opinions is needed. We have opinions that we think like it's important, but if you think it's important, you have to tell the leadership. Okay, you have to talk to the leadership and say, hey, I think we will be spending a much of money in this and it's not worth the investment. I think we should reconsider this kind of investment, something like that. But other people, they don't go to the leadership, they go to the person sitting next to them in the pew. They talk to them. So I don't know what's the purpose of it, because that's not the person who will resolve the issue, right? The person who will resolve the issue is the management themselves. So you have to go to the management, right? It's like these people, you're lining up to the, for example, you're paying for something and the queue is quite long, and the flow is not organized. You're telling the person right next to you, you're not going to the management. So the problem will not be solved. So you're there in 1 Samuel chapter number 14. 1 Samuel chapter number 14, verse number 1. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan the son of Saul said unto the young men that bear his armor, come and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison. It's on the other side, but he told not his father. So one of the mistakes that Jonathan did is Saul is the king. He is leading the charge. And then he and his servant went to the garrison of the Philistines without telling his father, right? So that's one mistake, right? The leadership needs to know what your action is, right? Because what if something happened to Jonathan and his servant? The one who would bear the result of it, whether he was killed, something like that, is Saul. He would take the responsibility over it. But he did. He went. And if we would go there, but for the sake of time, we will not go there. I'll just give you the overview. They did positive. They had a positive result because they slew Philistines in the garrison, right? So that's one of the things that made Jonathan, he's kind of strong because of the fact that he slew of the garrison of the Philistines. And then in 1 Samuel, the same chapter, starting in verse number 24, in 24 to 30. So the battle, and then Saul and he told his servants to number them, and he basically made a super rash vow. I'm gonna read this to you, okay? And you will decide if you think that's logical decision or not. But he said in verse number 24, and the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjured the people, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged of mine enemies. So none of the people tasted any food. And all day of the land came to a wood, and there was honey upon the ground. And when the people were come into the wood, behold, the honey dropped, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. So Saul basically made an oath, something like, you're not allowed to eat this day. Okay? But I don't think that's a logical reasoning because of the fact that they're in the battle. You need to have food, right? You need to have food so that you could be replenished with your strength. So they saw honey dripping, but no one put forth their hands. But Jonathan, since they're not in during that time when Saul made the proclamation, they don't knew. Okay? They didn't knew what the proclamation is. So what Jonathan did is in verse number 27, but Jonathan heard not when his father charged the people with the oath, wherefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it in a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. Then answered one of the people and said, Thy father straightly charged the people with an oath, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food this day. And the people were faint. Then said Jonathan, this is what the part I said to you, that is a vocal or open type. My father had troubled the land. See, I pray you, how mine eyes have been enlightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much more if haply the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found? For had there not been now a much great slaughter among the Philistines? So instead of humbling himself, he didn't hear the proclamation, he tasted of the honey. Instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the proclamation, sorry about that. But instead, he blamed his father. He said, my father had troubled the land. Well, thinking about the decision made by Saul, it's not logical. He's right in his reasoning, right? But in this situation, he caused the people to sin. Okay? So one of the reasons why we have to hold our heart with our right hands, because of the fact, it's just a simple thing to you, but when others saw you, especially people who are looking after you, when they see you as a leader, for example, in church, in serving God, when you do these little things, you don't know that sometimes you're causing other people to sin, right? If you read this story, he caused the people to eat blood. And eating blood in the Old Testament, right? And it was, even before the Mosaic law, it's forbidden to eat blood because life is in the blood thereof, right? So what Jonathan did is eat a little bit of honey, but the people who followed him made it over. What he did is like they eat blood, right? That's why Saul said that it slew all the flesh in front of me, he said. So that's one of the reasons. And, I'm going to make this point. It's like something like I made before we tackle about Jonathan. It's like not all that you think is right in your own heart needs to be uttered in the church, right? We all understand that the leadership will make mistakes in making decisions, but, if they made a wrong decision, then let's just support the leadership and how we can make it right? It's not because, it's not like, see, they made a mistake. I told you before, something like that, It's like blaming the leadership. Because being in church is you need to be in subjection, right? Well, you're not in subjection if you're just following the things that you agree, for example, right? You're in subjection. Subjection means like you follow the leadership whether you agree or not, right? That's meaning of the subjection. Means that, for example, you don't want to go to Gulay Street in Sowining, then you go to Gulay Street when you're assigned to Gulay Street, right? You're in subjection, right? Because nobody wants to walk that far, but you have to walk that far because you want to be in subjection. So that's a simple thing that I could think about subjection, right? So at this point of time, Jonathan wasn't in subjection to his father. And so what's the point of, of the sermon? Well, as we can see, the two examples, the first two examples with the positive example of those persons who held their heart with their right hand, and they were prospered by God. David became king. Joseph became the second most powerful person at that time, second only to Pharaoh. But these two examples, Jonathan and Gehazi, spent their life like Gehazi, he was backslidden as a Christian, for example, and Jonathan, he was killed, right, with his dad Saul. And also, if we could see the story before he was killed, it seems like that they don't have a good relationship with his dad. So, even though he was defending David, but seems like when we read the story, it's like they don't have that common mutual understanding, both of them, right? So we can take on this example, holding your heart with your right hand as a servant. There's no wrong thing of being a servant, okay? Right? All of us are a servant, especially spiritually speaking, we're servants of God, right? So in Psalm chapter number 84, verse number 10, is you're turning there, yeah, it says, I had rather to be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. So there's no wrong thing of being a servant. The wrong thing of being a servant is that you don't hold your heart with your right hand. And also one of the examples of this is like the devil in Isaiah chapter number 14. In verse number 13, he said, because thou sayest in thine heart, said, one of the examples of this, I will ascend into heaven. He said in his heart. So the devil himself is is an example who fell on his heart, falling to the desires of his heart, right? So as Christians, we should be very careful about letting our heart, overcoming us. And I was talking to Brother Stuckey, and I said, I made this sermon years ago. I don't know why is it that it was, I have to preach it after you preached about the heart, like the last Sunday, he said. But he says maybe God just want us to be reminded twice because it's because of the fact that it is important. So, last verse that we're turning is 1 Corinthians chapter number 10. So we'd always be remembering the bad ending and the good endings of these things, right? Because I'm not the one who is holding your heart. You're not the one who's holding my heart. So it's an individual thing. But in 1 Corinthians chapter number 10, verse number 11, now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. There had no temptation taken you, but such as is common to men. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above all that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. So in whatsoever state we are all servants. Even the people who are over us are a servant themselves. So we should hold our hearts firmly so that we will not suffer from the consequences of deceit and foolishness within our hearts. Okay? So some lost their opportunities to do great things for God because of a single fault, just like Gehazi did. So that's why we have to be very careful of holding our hearts with our right hand. So let's close with a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for this opportunity that you given me to preach in the congregation in this midweek service. Lord, I pray you would help us in holding our heart with our right hand, Lord. I pray that you would give us wisdom, knowledge, Lord, especially your word. You apply it into your hearts. We could apply it so that we could hold our hearts and we could serve you continually, Lord, until the end of our lives. So I pray. Amen.